Turkey in crisis. Its currencies hit a record low. The markets are nervous. President Erdogan accuses outsiders of mounting an economic war. But who's to blame? And what are the implications at home and abroad? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The Turkish lira is facing an unprecedented crash. It has lost more than 40% of its value against the dollar in recent days, and its meltdown is rattling global markets. Turkey's central bank has stepped in with measures it hopes will reassure Turks and financial markets. And the finance ministry says it has an action plan in place. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan blames the crisis on what he calls economic terrorists, but he's been criticized for his influence over the economy. From Istanbul, Sinem Kasolu reports.
Walking through a busy street, people take nervous glances at the foreign exchange screens, wondering how much less their money might now be worth.
The dollar is up, the prices are up.
What she wants to buy overruns her budget.
Give me a discount, please.
Her request is turned down. Turkish lira is down at least 30% against the dollar in 10 days. This doesn't only hurt the buyers, but the sellers too. Including Tibet Kartal. He has run this shop for at least 20 years. Half of his products are imported. His costs have risen tremendously.
We are almost at stagnation, waiting for exchange rates to settle. I purchase in dollars, so my costs increase 40%. I'll have to reflect this in my prices.
However, exporters are happy with the depreciating lira. Ferhat Onur, who has run the silver wholesaler with his brothers for 20 years, says his profits have grown.
Although I import my products, I export them all. We don't have a problem. My profit margin is bigger now. Also, we bring foreign exchange to our country, but the uncertainty worries everyone.
The finance ministry says it has an action plan to help ease the market's concerns. And Turkey's central bank has pledged to provide all the liquidity needed by the banks. Many economists say the markets demand an interest hike to stop the lira's tumble. But President Erdogan and his financial team are totally against that. Erdogan says this is a speculative attack against the lira by foreign countries and might continue. If it does, experts fear it could have a spillover effect into Europe, where Turkey's biggest lenders are. Sinem Kasolu, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
The financial crisis comes as ties between Turkey and the U.S. worsen. President Erdogan took action against American goods days after the U.S. doubled tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminum.
We will boycott American electronic products. If they have the iPhone, there is Samsung elsewhere. In our own country, we have Vestel.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called on Erdogan to respect the central bank's independence.
The German perspective is that no one has an interest in Turkey's economic destabilization, but everything must be done to ensure that there is an independent central bank that can work.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us in Ankara, Ozgur Unlukisarcikli, Director of the Ankara office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. In Berlin, Dietrich von Kyaw, former German ambassador and permanent representative to the EU. And in London, Ege Seckin, a senior political risk analyst at the firm IHS Markit. Welcome to you all. Ozgur, I want to start with you today. What can the government of Turkey do to stop this slide?
Well, I mean, they should do, first of all, we should maybe look into why this crisis has occurred, even before the fallout with the United States. I could cite 6 reasons. First, the very high current accounts deficit. Second, the private sector debt. Third, political risk at home. 4, geopolitical risks abroad. 5, market-unfriendly economic policies. And then 6, fiscal normalization in the United States. Some of these there is nothing that Turkey can do about, such as the fiscal normalization in the United States. But there's still a lot that Turkey can do for market-friendly economic policies, decreasing political risk at home, decreasing private sector debt, and decreasing the current accounts deficit. This would require political reforms as well as economic reforms.
Dietrich, have any of the efforts by Turkey's central bank thus far to try and reverse this decline been effective? Are there any signs that any of them are working?
I think they might go in the right direction, but will probably, in all likelihood, not be enough. Because what we are facing is a lack of confidence by investors, by international markets in Turkey. And that has to do with the attitude of the president, of Erdogan. And there is a lack of confidence, and therefore the central bank would have, from my point of view, have to increase interest rates and take real firm measures which might not be very popular with the general public. And therefore, the president hesitates to accept this, and the markets know this. So there's a lack of confidence, and as long as this will stay on, it will be very difficult for Turkey to recuperate.
Ege, you heard Dietrich there talk about the fact that President Erdogan has resisted thus far raising interest rates. Why exactly is that?
Well, for a long time, the general consensus in the markets was that when Erdogan insisted on his theory that high interest rates result in high inflation rather than the other way around, that was largely for the purpose of playing to the crowds, so to speak, for the domestic audience. However, we saw in a meeting recently when Erdogan came to London to talk to international investors, the president repeated those claims. And it was at that point that the markets started understanding that these were things which Erdogan genuinely believed. And that was really a turning point in terms of perceptions of Turkey and expectations of policy under Erdogan. The president appears to have a deep-seated fundamental opposition to interest, and whether that's rooted in his religious beliefs or what it might be, the result is the same. Turkey has been avoiding levels of interest which would be dictated by rational economic policy, and the result is a destabilized Turkish lira and rampant inflation. And to act now and to follow what the market is saying now means that they have to do even more than what they would have had to do before, because it's at this point it's very late, and the results are as we can see.
All right, let's take a step back for a moment. Turkey is one of the fastest growing economies and the 6th largest in Europe, but it's facing major challenges. The inflation rate has reached 15% this year, the highest in 14 years. Turkey's budget deficit rose by more than half to $13 billion in 2017. The value of Turkey's imports is higher than exports, leading to a negative trade balance of almost $77 billion last year. But on a positive note, the economy grew by 7.4% in the first 3 months of this year. Ozgur, let me ask you, how much worse could this now get for Turkey? I mean, could you envision a total financial collapse or meltdown in Turkey?
That is very unlikely, because despite all the negative factors, Turkey's public sector is still strong. Turkey does have a high international debt, but it's coming mainly from the private sector, and the public finances are very sound. And as a matter of fact, they are among the soundest in Europe. So a total financial meltdown is very unlikely at this moment.
Dietrich, why specifically is what's happening in Turkey affecting emerging markets the way that it is?
Well, because emerging markets in certain ways are in similar situations as Turkey is. It's a precarious situation. You are trying to stimulate economies, and there's always the risk that you go beyond rational limits. But in Turkey, this has taken place due to the attitude of the president. And therefore, there is the risk that others will also be affected. By the way, we are in Europe very much intertwined, in particular Germany, with Turkey, also economically. And therefore, there's also a risk that we might suffer to a certain extent, by far not as much as Turkey, but to a certain extent we will. We expect Erdogan to visit us in September, and we'll have serious discussions. We are partners in NATO, we are partners, we have a customs union between the EU and Turkey. We have 3 million Turks, partly with Turkish nationality, partly with German nationality, partly with both, living in Germany, working here. We have a vital interest in a stable Turkey and in good relations
I'm sorry
with
to
Turkey.
Dietrich, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that since you're bringing up the ties between Turkey and Germany, that leads me to a follow-up question for you, because on Monday, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that they want to make sure that that the central bank in Turkey has its independence. She also said nobody has an interest in an economic destabilization in Turkey, and everything must be done to ensure an independent central bank. So my question for you is, would Germany be in a position to help now in some way?
Well, I don't know. We will give him, Erdogan, the advice that our stability, our rising out of the ashes of World War II was largely due to not only our efforts and support and free trade and so forth, but also that we were run by our monetary policy by an independent central bank. And also the European Central Bank has insisted on that, is independent. No central bank that cannot act independently can pursue rational and reasonable monetary policies. And if Erdogan doesn't understand this, it will be almost hopeless to help Turkey. But if we should decide to see the light, we might be able, of course, to help him, because we have a vital interest in a stable Turkey for all kinds of strategic, economic reasons, but also because Turkey, due to the 3 million Turks in Germany, is part of our domestic policy scene.
Ege, what are President Erdogan's options right now?
Well, there are several options. I mean, the first obvious right thing to do would be to do what our other guest was suggesting, to provide the central bank with the independence that it needs to fulfill its mandate. But if Erdogan continues with his insistence to not allow this, then the other options are, one of them, of course, going to the IMF. There are many observers who are betting that this will end up being the case. However, of course, there's a big issue with that, and that is the fact that the government really invested a lot in its claim that it was under this government that Turkey finally came out of these IMF programs and subjugation to policies imposed by international organizations. For Erdogan to go back to the IMF would be a big embarrassment. Another option would be to seek support from alternative allies, which Erdogan has already hinted he might do, Russia, China, Qatar. But again, it's dubious the extent of the help which these governments may be willing to offer. Obviously, releasing the pastor would be yet another option, a very obvious solution to diffuse the economic strains. And the problem there, of course, is the fact that with the sanctions having been imposed on Turkey by President Trump, Erdogan no longer has a way to come to a solution with the US whilst also saving face and not appearing like Turkey is capitulating to the US's threats. And certainly to release the pastor, Andrew Brunson, right now without any major concessions from the US side would appear to be doing exactly that. So hence the difficulty of the situation.
Ozgur, you heard Ege there talk about the detained American pastor, Andrew Brunson. My question is, how much of this confrontation now is basically a fight between U.S. President Donald Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan?
I believe that it is the tip of the iceberg because particularly in the United States, as a matter of fact, sanctions towards Turkey related to Pastor Brunson were already being cooked in the Congress. So even if the president had not weighed in, we would see sanctions coming from the US Congress towards Turkey. So as a matter of fact, it's the visible part of a much deeper and bigger problem between Turkey and the United States. It includes Turkey's purchase of S-400 missiles from Russia. It includes, it includes differences between the United States and Turkey when it comes to Syria and actually the whole of the Middle East. It includes public opinion towards the United States in Turkey and public opinion towards Turkey in the United States. So I would not call it a problem between the presidents.
All right, Dietrich, is the U.S.-Turkey crisis beyond repair at this point, or do you think that it can be mended?
Well, two types, special types, if you want to put it, two egomaniacs are getting at each other. I'm quite squarely saying what I think about the two. And that's always difficult, in particular, because they are both determined by let's say, domestic policy consideration. In the United States, for instance, that they have November elections. And the Bible Belt, the pastor, the Bible Belt is important in the United States as support for President Trump and his party. So we have this aspect. And I would say that to the pastor, who is of the same Protestant connotation, Christian connotation as the Vice President of the United States, plays a big role. And we need to find a faith-saving mechanism to get this pastor out of the fire line. I think that is important. Yes, there are other considerations. And also, like the game Turkey plays by being half in, half out NATO, half with the West, half with Putin, buying war material from the Russians, etc., etc. I think he is overstretching his limits, and where he is vulnerable, he has now been taught that there's no free lunch, even not for a Turkish president. On the other hand, the American president doesn't care too much about what's going on in Europe, including Turkey. He has his own domestic agenda. So we are in a very precarious situation. And I, as a German European, I therefore think that not only Germany, but the European Union has to play a certain role in order to get things calmed down. But for that, we need also some flexibility from both sides, including also the president of Turkey.
Ege, it looked as though you were reacting to what Dietrich was saying there. Did you want to add to what he had remarked upon?
Well, my reaction was one of agreement. For the first time, the Turkish government finds itself with a US counterpart which doesn't really care whether Turkey remains in the NATO or not. At least when we talk about Trump himself, it's not really one of his primary considerations that go into his decision-making. Until now, Turkey always used that card based on the assumption that the US side would not risk losing Turkey to Russia and breaking the NATO ranks. And I think that was the source of the Turkish government's miscalculation in what happened in the past couple of weeks. And the question now is, based on what they have experienced, whether the president, Mr. Erdogan, will go into a strategic reconsideration in how it deals with the US, based on his realization that the old tactics no longer work. That's the optimistic scenario. The pessimistic scenario is one in which we are seeing the beginnings of a permanent break between these decades-old allies.
Ozgur, what do you think? What are the strategic and geopolitical ramifications of all of this?
First of all, I would like to express that although a diplomatic solution is possible, it is also very difficult at this point because the President of the United States, with his tweets and statements, has not only digged his heels into his current position, but has also denied President Erdogan an honorable way out of this crisis. So at the moment, a unilateral, let's say, decision by President Erdogan to release Pastor Brunson would make him appear weak domestically and also internationally. And that is something that President Erdogan would hate. So the solution should be something in which Pastor Brunson is released in return for something that President Erdogan can present to the Turkish society as a success. And the ramifications are actually very concerning. I don't think that either President Trump or President Erdogan has any intention to see Turkey outside of NATO, though maybe neither would care deeply. I believe that this crisis could trigger a dynamic at the end of which Turkey's NATO membership would be questionable in Turkey as well as outside. And even if it's not the intention of the Turkish president, actually events could drag Turkey towards such a situation. I believe that a lot is at stake and we should start acting today.
Dietrich, analysts have been saying that this financial crisis in Turkey has been a long time in coming. Has this been a long time in coming?
Of course it has, but it has been now reinforced by American countermeasures because of this clergyman issue, which should not be underestimated. I would like to repeat. We Germans, as well as we Europeans, have no interest in letting Turkey go down the drains, so to speak, economically. We want a stable Turkey in good relations in terms with the EU and with NATO, with all possibilities for Turkey also to play her role in the Middle East, etc. So we want to be partners. And we will, when Erdogan comes to visit us in Berlin in September, we will do our best to be of help. Whether that will be enough depends on the attitudes, yes, of the American president also, but also of Mr. Erdogan. I would like to remind you, we were recently under heavy threats from the American president on trade issues. And the Commission took a strong stand, but also a flexible one, and we came to a standstill, and we are now negotiating. It is not impossible to bring a similar situation about between Turkey and the United States, but it will require the help of friends and partners of Turkey. And we are still economically strongly linked with Turkey and also domestically through the 3 million Turks in Germany. We will try to do our best. Whether we will be enough to do so, we will have probably the help of the Commission, the EU Commission, and major partners like France in the EU, and we will do our best. That's all we can hope. It depends also on the flexibility of all parties participating in this.
All right, we are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there.
Because I want to be optimistic. I am optimistic.
Dietrich, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have run out of time. Yes. Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. So thanks very much to all our guests, Ozgur Unlukisarcikli, Dietrich von Kyaw, and Ege Seckin. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.